Hey, and welcome to the third short lecture from Chapter 7 in your textbook. In this lecture, I want to speak to you a little bit about influences on nonverbal communication. So you might have recognized at this point that we've discussed gender in all of the chapters of your textbook, and this one is no different. We find that there are differences with regard to nonverbal communication that are rooted in gender. We know that women are generally more non-verbally expressive, so they use more of those non-verbal cues like facial expressions, body language, differences in rate of speech, pitch, and tenor, and are generally better recognizing these same non-verbal behaviors in other people. This again goes with the idea of emotional intelligence. We know that women on average possess a higher level of emotional intelligence than men. They're just better at talking about these things, at recognizing how other people feel, and generally possess a higher degree of cognitive complexity. So with this, we know that women smile more, they use more head, hand, and arm gestures, they're more likely to touch other people, they stand closer, and are more vocally expressive and make more eye contact than men do. Interestingly, we find that gender differences are minimized in conversations involving gay and lesbian participants. What this means is that gay men, for example, are more likely to engage in the nonverbal behaviors that are listed above that women use commonly. Similarly, I guess I should say, lesbian participants in studies were less likely to do all the steps that women generally do in terms of engaging with each other non-verbally. Now, of course, different cultures also have different verbal and nonverbal kinds of languages, right? It's not, Italian people don't communicate differently than we do simply because they speak Italian. They also have a different nonverbal kind of language. And interestingly, we see that in a study involving multilingual politicians, researchers could tell the language the politician was speaking with the sound turned off. So that's to say that people who are good, right, or people who are keen on nonverbal communication and have a good understanding of it, could look at someone speaking with the sound turned off and just based on their nonverbal habits could tell you what language they were speaking, right? So this is really interesting to me. The idea is that it's not just, these cultural differences aren't just in language, right? They also exist outside or around language. And of course, it's also worth noting that some nonverbal behaviors have different meanings in different cultures. So this is another video that I'm not going to show you in an effort to keep things short, but I encourage you to go back and check it out because it tells you don't do these kinds of commonly done hand gestures in these different countries because they're insults here, right? So we know that different forms of nonverbal expression are interpreted differently depending on where you are. Now, we also find that culture affects how nonverbal cues are monitored, how people look for these kinds of cues and where they look. So, for example, in Japan, people focus on the eyes for nonverbal cues. In the United States, we look at the mouth, right? So this is interesting. In the U.S., we look to the mouth to see is someone frowning, are they smiling, right? How do they feel? But in Japan, they look to people's eyes. To monitor these same kinds of behaviors and forms of expression. Also, we know that there's a significant difference in distance. That is, how far apart or how close together people are when they communicate varies according to culture. So, for example, in the United States, we generally conduct business at a distance of about 4 feet. In the Middle East, in Middle Eastern countries, it's much closer, right? Sometimes 2 feet, 1.5 feet. We also know that eye contact is generally considered desirable in the United States, right? The same can be said in Latin America and in Europe, but it signals a lack of respect in many Asian cultures, right? So again, we find that these different kinds of behaviors send different messages depending on the culture, right? Now, there are also differences in how we use and perceive time, and this relates to communication as well. Now, you might be asking yourself, how does time help us communicate? Well, if you've ever had to wait for the doctor, right, there's clearly a message that's being expressed there, right? I'm busy. I'm important enough for you to wait for, and so on, right? I mean, there's a flow of power there that's occurring that's related to questions of status, right? You wait, I've gone to the doctor and waited for an hour. But if you go to McDonald's, you're not ready to wait for an hour, are you? Right? And this has to do with perceived status and authority and power, right? Who you're willing to wait for, who you aren't. So that's an example of how time can communicate. Now, we find that in monochronic cultures, these are cultures that value punctuality, schedules, and completing things on time. Excuse me, I'm congested all of a sudden. So an example of a monochronic culture might be the Swiss, right? So in Switzerland, if you've ever been there, Germany as well, right? Trains run on time. If the train is supposed to leave at 4:30, it leaves at 4:30, not 4:31, right? These are people who culturally value being on time and maintaining a schedule and completing a task on time. In a polychronic culture, people operate on a variety of flexible schedules, right? So poly meaning many, chronic meaning time. So in a polychronic culture, people are operating on different times, right? Multiple tasks are being pursued at the same time, and people get to it when they get to it, right? So Jamaica is one of my favorite places in the world. My wife and I go there fairly often, but in Jamaica, they have a polychronic culture where things get done when they get done, right? And the train, even if it's scheduled to arrive at 4:30, might not show up till 5:15. You never know, right? And that's just the way it is. And the culture values time in a different way, right? Okay, so that does it for this short lecture. I hope you learned something, and next time we'll talk about types of nonverbal communication.